doesn't originate with me. It was a nice idea by a guy who writes a blog called Fluent C++. And we're going to look at the blog and look at a little bit of code and look at a few applications, on Tuesday to see how how you might use that and why you might want to use it. And I probably won't do a whole lot of development because almost all this weekend will be spent grading DO stuff. Okay, I'm behind doing that. So, but that's the agenda. So. All right, let's talk about Project 4, Code Repository. Who's got questions about Project 4? Yes.
I've seen your Professor. I've seen your code in your Project 4 help.
Project 4 sample?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in that code, there are several changes in like how.
Yeah.
So do we need to use that?
No, whatever works for you. There was one place where in the, my model of the file system was that the file system would send an empty message, a message with empty content length to signal that this was that the receiver had gotten the whole file, and so the receiver could close it down. But in the demo I did, there was a case where you could get one of those messages both from the send file function, which is where I intended to come from, and also from the message loop, so I fixed that. And I changed the attribute from file, indicating I'm sending a file, to send file, a sending file, because you might want to use that file. You could see somebody using that file attribute to mean something else. I'm going to send you a file name that I want, for example, and now all of a sudden it would confuse it. So I made a few of those changes. Your channel's working the way you want it. You don't need to do a thing. You won't get points taken off because it doesn't look like my Project 4 sample. Okay, guaranteed. I think, for anybody here who's way behind on their projects and having trouble, getting stuff, you might probably want to use that instead of the Project 4 help demo. And I'll point them out, where you find those things. Other questions? Requirements questions? Yes. Tianyu.
According to your purpose, the last of the purpose for the cleanness of the repository should have agreed. This means to the last item, display all of the files in any category that have no parent. What is the detail of this?
So the model is that let's suppose that I put into the repository some code for a library or reusable parts or something like that, and they won't have a parent. How do I find that stuff? The model of this has no parents is show me all the things that could be roots that interest me. Instead of having to guess and look around, it just shows you, for example, all the projects, the executive would have no parent. So that would immediately return all the executives from projects. And it would also return the top level file for sockets and the top level file for the COM channels and stuff. Okay. So it's just a way of seeing the beginning of of all the parts in the repository. That's the purpose.
So one of the possible implementation could be in the query option.
Yeah.
Add an option or add a selected item that means no category or no parents. That will return all of the files that you
Yeah.
described.
I think that was really what I had in mind when I wrote that. I think a query is the right thing to do. Yeah.
Moreover, in this project, when we demo our requirements, should we just use the form of the project 3? But in this time, we just transmit the meaningful information and display the.
Yeah, so you got some tests that are running and writing to a console behind the GUI, for example.
And,
Yeah.
In this demonstration, should we also start multiple clients?
To get complete credit, yes. It does say clients in the plural in one of the requirements. So, you know, if you don't do that, you won't lose. You know, you'd lose a point or two. Not a lot of score, but you really don't. You don't have to do anything to make multiple clients work. The channel really does that for you already. But what you do have to do is either have two client projects. If you're using fixed port numbers, then you'd have to have two client projects with different port numbers embedded in them. It's a better idea to have a connection page where you can specify your own port number as well as the port number you want to reach, you know, or some mechanism, you know, or maybe pass on the command line the port number for your listener. That's another excellent way to do that. But it certainly will be acceptable to have two client projects with hardwired port numbers. But so the answer is to get, if your goal is to get 100 on the project, then you want to demonstrate you can two clients. If you're satisfied with 98 and you do everything else beautifully, then you don't need to. Okay. Good. Other questions? Yes, Jessica.
So for requirements 4, 5, and 6, I think those are already demonstrated in the project
4, 5, and 6. So what that means, 4, 5, and 6. So what that means is that you will use the same tests. It doesn't mean that you don't have to demonstrate them. Saying, I demonstrated these project 3, I'm done. You'll lose credit for it.
Right, but
Okay.
then the same thing, we don't
But
have
you
to
could-
implement anything new.
No, you can just use the test. I think. So let me look at this carefully. Okay, convince myself that that's the correct answer. So. Yeah. So you might say, do I have to? You know, you can't demonstrate another machine, but because it's based TCP stack based, it's going to work on another machine. Okay, so, you know. Yeah, nothing new in 4, nothing new in 5. I think you. This one-way messaging is an interesting. So how would I demonstrate that it really is one way, that I'm not sitting and waiting for an acknowledgement? One way to do that would be to provide an attribute on a message, so your dispatcher, the sender, if it sees an attribute in the message that says don't send, okay, then it never replies. And so you're demonstrating you're implementing one way by sending a message like an echo message, and you say, here I'm sending an echo message expecting a reply. Now I'm sending the echo message with a don't reply attribute, and nothing comes back. And so that demonstrates fairly clearly that you're really doing one way, okay? But would we get that picky? I don't know. Probably, you know, the TAs are going to be really busy, you know, with the first pass, and I'm going to be really busy with the second pass. So, you know, I don't know that we'll be that picky, but We are going to be picky about 7. Really picky about 7. That you really demonstrate you meet the requirements. So, you know, you got to be quite literal here. You want to make sure that you're really demonstrating those requirements. Okay. We have so many things to grade in such a short period of time. My grades are due, you know, right after graduation, and the TAs have to grade them, and then I got to look at them, and I try to look at them fairly carefully, you know, after I get them back from the TAs, and so we really need you to be really clear about, and we will, you know, as always, if you implement something and you don't clearly demonstrate it, you don't get credit for it. End of story. And I think you should take that, not just for this class, but that should be a working, habit of yours when you're out working professionally. You demonstrate clearly. You have a test sequence or something that demonstrates really clearly that you've met the requirements that you're supposed to for the components you write. It makes design reviews a whole lot easier and less contentious, you know, and helps to mechanize information exchange. You may have some really smart guys out there, you know, guys who've been working in this product a lot longer than you have. They know a lot about the product, and you know they'll have things to say about your design. And you know, if you've made it really clear in your testing, then you know that helps that communication channel with those really smart, experienced guys. Okay, you know, you're really smart, but you're not as experienced, so. That answer your question?
How can we display file dependencies in the GUI?
Don't know that you're you definitely want to be able to show, you know, in the browser should show file dependencies, and there's a bunch of ways to do that. If you use the data template for the list box and you have checkboxes, then when you browse, you get the dependencies. You just check those checkboxes. You know what has to happen is, you know, the user has to be able to select the parent, okay, and then check. The checks come in all the children of the. That's a good way to do it. That's how I would do it. You know, I'm going to implement this summer, and that's my mental model of how I will do it. Yeah, I might change my mind between now and the summer, but you know.
That means the server prototype has to communicate with like what we have done in project 2, right?
Oh, the server has to be able to, you know, you got to be able to make queries on the database. That's why the database is there, so that you can send query requests. Okay, and that's one of the most interesting parts of the design. How do you really do that? You know, how do you ensure that any of the kinds of queries you might want to make, you can do from the server? And that, you know, that involves message design, that involves the server proc, client proc design, that involves the query design. You know, lots of interesting parts of that.
It's like different language.
Yeah, you know, I don't think it's reasonable for you to try to make sure before you submit project 4 that you can do any possible query. You know, that's untestable. How do I know when I'm done? You don't. But I would make sure that all the things you have to demonstrate you can do with using the query mechanism. Okay. That's what it's there for.
Yeah, I asked you because like in GUI we use like C# and in server side we use like C++. So
Not a problem.
Okay.
I promise you it's not a problem, okay? The processing, models are the same. You got a dispatcher on either end, message dispatcher that takes they're not identical. On the server side, it takes a message and returns a message. On the client side, it just takes a message and doesn't return anything because the model is that it's not going to, But, and in fact, it would be perfectly plausible on the server side to design a proc that only accepted a message that didn't return a message by default, but then the body of the proc, every proc that needed to return a message, it built and sent the message itself. The reason I didn't do it that way was I didn't want my procs to have to know how to manipulate the communication system. In case the I decided to change the communication system, I don't want to build in a bunch of, So my solution was to have a don't reply attribute. So back comes this reply message, but the sender, the server sender, looks at it and says, "Oh, don't reply," drops it on the floor. Okay. So, right. Yes, Jessica.
I think you mentioned that you want us to provide a method for navigating through hundreds of files, for example. So that's for when you check in to navigate the local folders, or when you want to display?
I don't think it's terribly important for local folders, but it's certainly important when you're when you're trying to navigate around the server.
Okay.
I don't want to discourage you from attempting that. I think that's a great thing to attempt, but you're not going to supply us with 10,000 files. We're not going to add 10,000 files. So, but what you want to do is try to use a concept that makes it plausible. I stated a couple of times, I think one way to do it, partly, one way to do it is this answer I gave to Tianyu, that you're showing people the items with no parents, and so, you might get 10 things that represented hierarchies of 2,500 files, okay? Because they were the tops of big projects or something. I think another thing is building your GUI to accept a provider, so the GUI is displaying groups and elements, and the provider decides, is a group a directory and element a file, or is a group a category, an element a file, or is a group a namespace, so. Okay, so that provider idea, and if I were in your shoes, I'm happy with what I built, everything's working well. What I would probably do is I'd just put in comments, it would be a really good idea to use a provider here that would help us, that's fine for now. Okay.
Professor, where should we display the metadata? In GUI or
I think you definitely don't want to display it in the server. Okay. The model is the server is invisible. Nobody's sitting at the server, so who's going to tell? For demonstrating the requirements, you might find it easier to have the server print out some requirements on the its console, and that's fine. But for the normal operation, everything is displayed at the client. And so I would, my model of the browse function is, when I double click on a file, so my navigator, I double click, instead of just bringing up the file code, I would bring up a window with 2 panes in it, one for code, 2 scrollable panes, one for code, one for metadata. Okay. I might not have all the metadata, I might just have the description, because that's what people are, and links to the children that I could click on and get to a child. But other metadata, I might, a way of doing that is having a show all metadata button or something, and so up pops a view with all the metadata, something like that. And a lot of those things are nice to have, but not really there in the requirements. So if you simply displayed in a pop-up window the code and description and children links if you could get the time to do it, okay, then that certainly, you know, that would be a full score answer. Okay? Other questions? Yes, Cheng. Footnote 1, categories are the names of folders in which the repository stores its source code and web files. You may define categories in any way that seems sensible. For example, they could simply be namespaces for the uploaded files or a client-supplied name. Yep.
So in this project, we can view category as a namespace.
Could, but I think that's limiting. I think viewing it as everything this guy says. So now it's just your way of painting in, you know, think of it as keywords. So now you're giving the author the ability to show keywords about his file to other users. And, you know, one of the keywords could be namespace. One of the keywords, you know, the model categories has a particular implication. The idea, we want a file to have multiple categories, and we want a category to be able to hold multiple files. So what that means is that simply putting a file in a directory doesn't specify a category. Because how are you going to have two categories for that file? You could make links and stuff like that, but oh, that's awkward, you know. That you're pinching your ear, you know, by doing that. So, you know. So I would just treat it as a user definable, and you know, an organization might have a coding standard about here's what we want you to put in the categories, but you know. All right, make sense? When do you leave for MathWorks? 14th? Cool. 14th. So you've been here 2 semesters?
Yeah, this is my second.
Oh, okay. I'm going to be really interested. We've sent a number of students to MathWorks, and I think every one of them has had a real good experience there. It's a nice place to be, you know, but also, you know, they're doing interesting things. So, other questions? You're going to send me an email tonight, right, Bosali? Right. Bosali. Other questions?
How can server prototype communicate with repo call?
Say this again?
How can the server prototype communicate with repo call? Repository call.
How can the server prototype communicate with a repository core? I have a hard time answering that question because I don't have a repository core in my design. Okay. So, you know, communication, the obvious communication mechanism is to have one element hold other elements as data members, and then communication from the holder to the holdee is trivial. Just call its function. You know, you can in the constructor pass a reference, a pointer or C++ reference to another place that you want that guy to be able to communicate with. Your component can have what's called an advise interface that allows some other components, this other component says, I know you want to talk to me, so here's my reference. It passes it through a function call, and now the guy's got a reference that he can call back. In the worst case scenario, when you can't think of any other way to do it, you can use the singleton approach, providing global access. You have a wrapper with a static. You got to be really careful of that because that can cause problems with multi-threading and, you know, but so that's a last resort. But
I mean, in Project 3, we have implemented repo call, right? But you told me like your mental model doesn't have a repo call. So you mean like?
no, no. It's I take that back. You know, repo core is a very reasonable. You know, I often design things that way, and then I'm adding functionality to that core, just like there was a DB core,
Yeah.
and you know, same idea.
Because I'm thinking like middle call. No, repo call is kind of like middleman.
Yeah, yeah,
Context, like,
yeah.
check
So
out.
so now who do you want to communicate to repo core?
Server prototype.
So what you mean is some server proc.
Yeah.
Some server proc needs to communicate with the repo core.
Like when I check in from GUI,
Yeah.
send a message to server proc, and then the server proc do something with repo call.
One way to do that you could as an argument to the server proc pass it always a reference to the repo core. That's one way to do it. Very safe way. A little awkward because now you got another argument and blah 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 blah. Okay. You can make the repo core public to its namespace better than making it's sort of it's like using global data, but it's global to the namespace. So or you can make a static wrapper, like my DB provider in the test. You could do the same thing with a repo core provider. The lambdas are that communication problem is always a little tricky with lambdas because lambdas aren't they're not deriving they don't get automatic access to the server core.
What if I had like multiple clients? How can we handle that?
The server doesn't care.
Okay.
Doesn't care. He's just handling messages. The fact that they come from two different clients are just two different from addresses. That's all. Server doesn't care. That has no effect on the server.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm talking about like if the client make an attempt to check in
Okay.
simultaneously. How could we handle that?
Are you talking about authorization? Are you talking about he's logging in, or are you talking about he's checking in?
He's checking in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the problem is because the message should have his name.
Oh. That means we don't have to worry about like
Yeah.
concurrency.
Yeah. There's no concurrency issue there at all because the server's just processing one message at a time. That's the whole idea of that single-threaded department. The server's processing one message at a time. And clients, they just get queued up, but, The nice thing about that design, if you really want the server to be concurrent, you can make concurrent methods, You need to be careful that they don't trump on each other, For example, you might need a retry wrapper for a file opening and stuff like that if you do use concurrency in the server. But yeah, no, it would be crazy to do it in Project 4. You don't want to do that in Project 4. That's a good summer project thing. How can I work that out? And it's those kind of things that I'm going to be thinking about this summer, so on my own repository.
Thank you so much for this.
Okay. Yes, just.
So right now I have a static variable of repository inside my server class to handle the check-in, check-outs and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Or you don't want that, or you want it?
No, that's okay. That's okay. My own style is to try, when I'm doing that, to make it a little more obvious that I'm doing that. You know, those kinds of references can sometimes be a problem. It won't in this design. You know, it'll work just fine in this design. But if I were doing a multi-threaded design, if the server truly were multi-threaded, wasn't a single-threaded department, was truly multi-threaded, now you got a problem. Because how are you going to, you know, now you'll have to lock every access to that reference. Okay. But in this design, that's just not a problem. Okay. And I'm not saying you can't, you know, you can make a thread safe. You can make that thread safe. But you start to get into problems, you know, there's the caching problems and stuff like that,
So
you know, funny things
so
go.
if it's not part of the server, it's not going to be a problem even under the multi-threaded design. For example, if you do it as the DB provider, do it that way, it won't be a problem. It won't have the access problem.
If it was, no, making it a DB provider instead of making a reference in the server doesn't do anything about that concurrency issue at all. All it does is make it obvious that that's what you're doing. Okay, so it's right out there in front of everybody, you know. You'll remember, 6 months from now, you'll remember how you did it, you know. It won't be, oh, where am I, you know.
So either way, I will still have to design the multi-thread access to the repository core if I, hypothetically, I have the...
That's something you have to think through. You know, it's hard for me to give you a general answer to that. But this single-threaded department model that we're using just makes all those problems go out the window. They're gone. Just don't have to worry about them. And those kinds of problems are hard to get right. The problem is that you can get funny effects happening. You can make tests and you're testing the wrong thing because you're testing a stale cache item, you know. Any variable, you don't know whether it's, am I talking to the cache value? Am I reading it out of memory? Chances are you're reading it out of a cache, L2 cache or something like that from your machine. And now, you know, especially with C++, it's hard to guarantee that you're getting the truly current. When two threads are changing things, you know, C# and Java provide the volatile keyword that guarantees, if you've declared it as volatile, any access to it will cause flushing of the cache one way or the other, depending on whether I'm reading or writing. And guaranteed is going to be fresh. But C++ volatile doesn't do that at all. Okay, all C++ volatile does is prevent the compiler from optimizing that variable away, because it never sees you make a change. So it's there. If I'm sitting here looking at a register that I'm not going to change, but will change, you know. But so yeah, better to just eliminate those problems by design if you can, and that's what I think the single-threaded department does. Yes, Pei.
Hi, could you please provide a demo that can show us how to integrate the NoSQL database and the mock repository core and the demo?
I don't have the time to do that, and I probably wouldn't do it anyway. You should be able to do that now.
Just a mock demo, mock repository.
I don't have the time to do that. I don't. And I don't think, you know, I think you should be able to do that by now.
What about just provide a mock repository?
I don't have the time to do that. I am flat out, okay? I'm grading. You know, I've spent a lot of time with you guys. I have to spend some time with the DO guys. I'm way past due spending a lot of quality time with the DO guys. And that's all I'm doing, you know, aside from this discussion of strong types and you know and stuff on Tuesday. That's all I'm doing. I'm not going to provide any more demos. So, you know, what I would suggest you do is the following. A, you're late. You know you're late. That should have been done, in my opinion. I would have done that in Project 3. Well, you weren't required to, but I would have done it in Project 3. But, you know, it isn't much more than taking the NoSQL entire solution, if you want, take that folder, put it in your Project 4 project folder, and now make references to it. In my demo, in this demo, so in this demo, this was just just this guy. In that demo, here's what I did. Let me compress all these so we... Now, I'm running the code analyzer, for example. So I wanted this actually was a sample for the online CSE 687 course that I did. Okay, I did because they don't have TAs and they don't have Friday morning help sessions. I did a very detailed sample for Project 1, Project 2, Project 3, Project 4 that used the same kinds of things they had to use. Okay, and in this sample, I had in their Project 3 was to build, their Project 2 was to build a code analyzer. The Project 3 was to add an abstract syntax tree to the code analyzer. Project 4 was to make a remote code analyzer. So what I did was I took my code analyzer, I just dropped in the message passing communication system and dropped in, I just took that project, dropped it in. Okay. Actually, in truth, what I did here was I didn't start with the code analyzer. I started with our Project 3 help, okay? And I just took the code analyzer and I took that whole solution file, copied it into the solution, and then used it, made references to it, So I compiled it as I'm compiling that as an EXE because what I'm really doing is I'm running it as a separate process. And I took the process demo that I just dropped it in. Took that solution folder, dropped it in. That's all I did. So integrating the NoSQL database into your Project 3 to make Project 4, to make progress with Project 4, you just take that NoSQL database folder that you did in Project 2 and drop it right into. Or if you don't like your NoSQL database, take mine, okay, and drop it in. Just take that whole folder, drop it in. And then you can compile it as a dynamic library, or static libraries, or whatever you want. Okay, and just use it. Make references in the various projects and just use it. Okay, so. But I gave you an enormous amount of help for project 1, a lot of help for project 2, a lot of help for project 3 with the communication channel, and I'm just not going to give you any more help. Okay, other than All right, I promise you that'll work. It will. Just take that folder and copy it in. If you do that and you have a problem, you can go talk to the TA. I did it. I didn't have a single problem. I just took the folder, dropped it in, compiled the processor example as a static library, and I made a reference to it in the in my server, which was the server had to run the basically when I run the analyzer, what happens is my server on that remote machine creates a process that runs the analyzer, passing it the command line. So from my GUI, I send it the command line that I want that to run, okay? And so that process thing just gives it the command line and runs it, and then and the code analyzer writes a file, logfile.txt. And what I do is I just send that logfile.txt back to the GUI. Okay, so and that was just drop in. All right.
So the real requirements are the words above the requirement coding word. Is that right?
I'm sorry.
On the requirements web page, there is a word requirements, but above this word there are many lines of requirements.
So let's look at the. So here, there's requirements, and above it, there's this purpose section that says blah, 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 blah. Okay. So these aren't requirements, but so what happens is, if I've said something, so clients of the remote code repository will provide a graphical user interface GUI with means to blah, 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 blah. Okay. So what happens is, if you meet the letter of the requirements down here, but you don't do what this says, this says, well, you'll lose design points. Okay, that's what we do. Okay. But, that's actually to your benefit for us to do it that way, because there's a limit to how many design points we can take off. If you look at the grade sheet, I don't think I can take off more than 10 points max, or even probably less than that. I've forgotten what the grade sheet says, but let's pull up the grade sheet and see what it says. So, wrong thing. Where did my dark file? Here we go. So on design, global variables, if you don't have any global variables, you won't lose points for that. Design code simplicity, 5 points max. Cyclomatic complexity, small function. So the most you'll lose if I say we're take off, that's 5 points. Okay, so to your advantage. Do it that way, but.
What I mean is that in the demonstration, we should show that we meet all the requirements. Should we, in the format of, show we meet all the requirements above the word requirements, or we just follow the rules that
below the requirement?
So that's a good question. You're clearly obligated to demonstrate you meet all the requirements that are stated as requirements. I think it's a good idea to maybe with less precision or more quickly done, but some of the stuff will be obvious, upload one or more source code files, that clearly that's a requirement. That's in the requirements. Communication channel could send files, so you got to demonstrate it. Specifying one or more categories with those with which those files are associated. So yeah, shall provide a client program that can upload and download files and view repository contents as described in the purpose section. Okay? So that's my escape clause. So that says you got to do that. Okay? But, in the spirit of where we're going later on this morning, I think what I would do is I would take what you have where you are, as long as that works, what you've implemented works. I would set up tests for all the requirements, and I would mark, as I'm doing some of the tests that for requirements I haven't implemented, I would say not implemented yet. And then I would just work them off one by one. If you use that dispatching mechanism that we talked about, so all you're doing is you design a message for that requirement, you design a client proc and a server proc for that requirement, okay? And now you demonstrate it, and you just work them off one by one, and if you get to the point where, hey, it's the due date, you don't want to lose 5 points a day, you just submit what you got. Almost certainly you'll get a higher score than if you sit for 3 days trying to meet all the requirements, because you probably won't even meet all of them in 3 days. If you haven't met them by the due date, you probably won't meet them in another 3 days. You might meet 1 or 2 more, and so you would probably lose a lot more points than you would gain by doing that. So it's not a good. That's not a winning strategy. So I think, what I would do is one strategy would be, if you went to this, whether this strategy I'm about to describe makes sense or not depends on how much you've done already that works. Okay. But let's take the worst case scenario, and nothing I have done works very well. Okay? So a strategy for that would be to take this project and you could leave the code analyzer in, does no harm, okay? Or you could yank it out. Probably better just to leave it in so you make sure you don't break anything. But now, what you want to do is, what I would do, if I was in that position, and I wanted to start, what I would do is, the first thing I would do is, I would take this GUI and I would surround it with a tab control so that all of this becomes one tab, a browse tab. Okay. So I just go into my markup, and I would have a grid. I would take what I have in the interior, I would surround it with a grid, and I would put I would put a row for the tab control, and I would put a row for the status bar, and then below the tab control is a tab item, and everything in this window becomes a tab item. So all of this got wrapped with a tab item inside a tab control inside a grid. And that would be in the first row of the grid. So you'd have a row definition, that would be the first row of the grid. And I would have the last row of the grid would be a status bar. I don't remember whether they implemented a status bar here or not, but I would have a status bar. Okay, because that can be a big help in demonstrating you meet requirements. Okay, so now I have a bunch of, and now to add a new tab item, all you got to do is add another tab item. And so you just add these named tab items that don't do anything yet. And then the next thing I would do is I would design a message for each tab and a client proc and server proc for each tab that started out doing nothing but sending a message. I'm checking in. And back comes a reply, received your check-in, and you write that down on the status bar. And, I'm checking out or something. So now each of those pieces of functionality, you just have, this is a mock. It's a dummy waiting to be filled in. And now, one by one, you fill them in until you run out of time. So what that implies is that you've studied this sample a little bit. You're fairly comfortable with the way the sample works, and especially you've looked at the message class, you understand its design. You've looked at the server dispatcher and the client dispatcher. They're both just, for the server, the dispatcher is just an unordered map that takes a message ID as a key. It's just one field out of the message as a key. It's what I put in the message command. And the value is a lambda that implements that functionality. And on the client side, it's the same idea because this is now C#. It's a dictionary instead of an unordered map, but it's a dictionary. Same, it's an associative key value thing, okay? It's done the same way. So now I have a tab for each requirement, and now it's a fairly straightforward process of one by one implementing that functionality, okay? That makes sense? All the people that I know it makes sense to are sitting there smiling, and all those people I'm worried about are just sitting there looking at me. Okay. In half an hour, I'm going to kick everybody out except those who think they really need some help. Okay, and we'll talk a little more candidly about where you are and, strategies to pull your bacon out of the fire. All right. Yes, Wei Heng.
For example, I have two solutions, and each solution has a file named GUI. And when I check in it, so should every GUI have different namespace before its name, or?
There's several solutions to that problem. So you raise a really interesting question. We've talked about it a little bit before. There's one solution is to take the GUIs and zip them. And what you're going to check in and check out is just a zip for the GUI. And the reason you might choose to do that is the GUIs, if they're written in .NET C#, they all have, for example, an assembly info file, exactly the same name, and but different contents. And there is a main function buried way down in a subdirectory of a subdirectory of a subdirectory. Tons of stuff like that. And you would go berserk trying to namespace every one, and if you did, you'd find it wouldn't work anymore because they're using some naming convention and stuff. So I think the best solution is that you say, my best solution is to give up and zip it, and now I'm going to, but only for GUIs. That's the only thing you need to do it with GUIs. I'm going to zip it, and I'm going to, that's going to be my item that I store in the repository. That's the file. Okay?
So with something named test.cpp, we can do the same thing. Some file named test.cpp, for example, we have two solutions, and each solution.
I would prefer not. That I think should be namespaced. The reason is that there's only one file. It's fairly small. It's an easy problem to take care of. And now, you like to have them in the repository as files so that you can just click on them and pull them up and see them and look at their contents. But if you provided that capability in your GUI, but that's just impractical for GUIs. That's the only case I can think of. But there might be others, that you would maybe there's some foreign code that you're using, and you just don't want to manage all its parts and stuff. You just want to be able to pull it out and build it, and, install it someplace. You don't want to worry. It's not your code, somebody else's code, third-party library. Okay, I would probably do that in my repository as well. Okay, make sense? Yes.
I think so discussed before. I just want to make sure that adding dependencies to files, I know it has to be demonstrated on the server, it is mentioned as well. But from the GUI, if we don't demonstrate it, would we lose marks for that?
Yes. So again, I've given you my mental model for how to do that, Ritesh. Using the checkboxes in a data template in your list box. That's not the only way to demo that. You could have a separate window, a separate tab, a relationship tab or something, and where you put in a parent, and it just showed you a list in a list box and that would be fine.
Sure. I'm just trying to figure out if I'm running out of time, what is going
to Yeah. As you run out of time, not showing the relationships. If you convince us that you are able to use the NoSQL database, it's just you don't have time to mechanize the display of that query for the relationships, one thing you could do is just do a query and display the relationship just as I can find these, okay, but and you don't put them in the GUI. You might lose a point, or but not a huge thing. If you're making it clear that you can do the fundamental thing, GUI, getting GUIs to sanely present in a nice, usable way information is one of the harder things we do. So I think I would try to show it without putting it in the GUI. And then, if you have time, put it in the GUI.
Another question is, for the last two projects, we have popped up the file text. Is that a requirement here as well?
So in the last two, so I don't know what you mean by pop up the file checks.
So basically, in project 2, I think we had popped up the notepad window with the contents of the file.
If you can do. If you can do that, the answer is no.
So I can do this, but in project 3, I have not automated it in the demonstration. So my question was, is that a requirement for project 4?
It is a requirement for Project 4, you know, from that, you know, when it says do all the described as described in the purpose section, and that's described in the purpose section. But I think we should accept without penalty, in view of the decreasing amount of time that's available, a statement from you that says toward the end of your output, you can see that I've implemented the code view pop-up by double-clicking on a file in the files list box. Okay. And you know, we shouldn't take off credit. Do me a favor and send me an email message about it. I want to make a list of the TAs of things that I don't want them, you know, things I want them to accept, and that'll be the first item on the list. Okay.
One other question was handling multiple versions. Is that on us, or is there a fixed requirement on how to handle multiple versions of the same?
Not how to, but you must. You must handle versions, but there's no requirement on how you're going to do that. Okay. I intentionally left that, you know, I don't want to make my specifications so complete that this is not a design course, it's a programming course. I don't want this to be a programming course. Okay. Yes?
When can we expect to get Project 3 results?
Project 3's I am getting back on Thursday night, and so I will hand them out in the help session Friday morning. Okay, and the projects are due on Tuesday. Tuesday the 1st, right?
Yeah.
You say that, yeah.
They have DO.
I know. I know. I know. One thing you might consider doing is, do you have the COM part of DO working?
Yeah, one of them.
One of the components, but not the whole system?
No, just file management. Yeah. You mean ATL project, right?
You know, I think there's a time management strategy here. The most important part of DO is your final presentation.
Yeah.
And the individual projects, you know, you'll be graded, but they carry much less weight than the final project.
Exactly, that's why.
So, and if you've done some, you're illustrating that you can use COM, you know, you'll get a fair amount of credit for that. So one strategy would be, I'm going to set that aside and make sure that I get the Project 4 done, the OOD Project 4 done in the way I wanted to do it, and then go back and...
Yeah, because I spend most of my time on final project. I mean DO's final project.
Yeah, yeah. That's my intent that you do, you know, but I do want you to, you know, one of my goals is that you come away understanding what COM is and basically how to implement a COM component. Quite a few of my former students have or are working on COM. So.
If you don't grade this weekend, we grade.
No, I am grading this weekend, and I'm going to start taking off points. But you know, I will be reasonable. You know, DO in this class, because there's so many students, you know, I got to be strict. With DO, I'm quite a bit more forgiving. You know, it doesn't mean that I'll just blow away. You know, I will take off late points, but you know, one thing I've done some years is I've stopped after 5 or something like that. You know, so, but I do have to have the DO projects. You know, you can't give it to me the day of graduation, okay? Because my grades are due the day after graduation. So, No, so my grades are due the Tuesday after graduation. So,
Good.
so.
But when will I know like the result, the feedback? The feedback of
When you stop by and see me in the summer, sometime, okay.
Oh,
So.
I thought you're gonna work on it this weekend. I mean,
I am. Oh, well, I'll give feedback. You know, if you submit and you want to submit what you have and you want that to be your final grade, that's fine, and I'll grade it and you'll get feedback on what you got.
No, I mean I'm talking about like take presentation.
The presentations I am grading. I am giving you. You know, my plan is to give you feedback on Tuesday. Give everybody feedback on what they've done so far on Tuesday. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
My schedule is so tight.
Yeah.
Is there a requirement for the design of GUI?
Design of what?
GUI.
GUI?
Yeah.
No, I really want that to be your design. You know, I've tried to give you examples of really clean designs. What I don't want to see is some students' reaction is not to use tab displays, to use one big window with a list box here, text box, you know, little widgy things all over the place. It's ugly, it's hard to use, you know, so you'd lose design points if you did that. But if you use a tab display and, you know, any reasonable, we'll be happy with it. Okay? I really want you to design.
So are there still any requirements for the single ownership, the file single ownership policy?
No, there's a requirement for an ownership policy, but not necessarily single ownership. You can do what you want.
So if I implement single, would I get bonus points?
No.
No?
No, we don't have time to give bonus points.
Okay.
You know, it would be nice, you know, but
All right.
the answer is no. Any other questions before I kick most of you out?
Yeah.
All right, why don't everybody who doesn't need extreme help pack up and go, and let me talk to those who need extreme help. Aren't you going to stay? You're doing okay? Good, good. I'm delighted. Fantastic. That's really good news. I'm pleased. Pleased for you and pleased for me.
In my third project, like I have taken a lot of help from your projects and implemented it like right. The only thing is like the message passing and everything, but for the fourth project, like we will need the second project, and which is really bad. So I was just wondering that if you're going to post anybody's project, or should I just go on
I'm
with
not.
my project?
I thought about it a lot. I know I said I would. I decided not to.
Okay, so if I go on with my project and then I need help from the DA just to know, make sure that it's going
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it would be fine, right?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And you can always come and talk to me too. I want you to talk to the TAs first, but if you need more than what you can get from them, you're welcome to come to my open office hour
Just
next
one
week.
last question. Do you need an automated GUI or the server and client?
No, you don't need an automated GUI. What I would do is, in my GUI, I would have a console background like I've shown you how to do.
Yeah.
Right? And I would
they
just do,
both are just
yeah.
So I've done my third.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Here, for example, can I write the key this way, not column, but this?
I don't understand what you're asking me.
In the DB core, we have key and value.
Uh-huh.
Can I write the key this way? This is the key, not column.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I expected you would. The key isn't a aggregate. It's a single thing. It's a string that's made up of the namespace and the file name and the extension and the version. So yeah, absolutely. That's what I expected. That's the way I would do it.
Okay.
And when I checking a file in different solution, and should I new folder this way, new directory, for example, here.
If you do, that's okay. I'm not a big fan of letting clients create their own direct. If you're talking about creating a local directory, that's fine. But if you're talking about creating a directory on the repository, I think that's a bad idea.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah, you won't lose points for doing that. But from a real repository, if I let everybody, I got 200 developers working on this project, real big project, and if everybody chooses their own directory, we're gonna have chaos.
Yes.
It won't make any sense.
So when I check in, for example, there are two users. They check in two files. They are not the same file, but they have the same name. For example, test or other things. So
they should have different namespaces, or they won't compile.
So
you handle that with namespaces.
So for every file, they should show the namespace before the file name.
I would.
Okay.
I would. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
To me, that's part of the key.
Okay.
Because you need that to disambiguate. The dictionary can only take unique keys, and the only way to ensure that it's unique is to include the file name, the namespace as well. So I absolutely would do that. I would have the namespace before your.
So
okay.
What would happen if I only have one folder in the repository, one directory, not?
You could. You could.
I can do that.
You could. Sure.
Okay.
You
Thank
could.
you.
Professor, what is that? Is that content are you looking for in the mail? What is that content do you want me to add in the mail?
Wasn't I gonna look at? Didn't you have an issue about wanting a point back for something, or did I take care of that already?
No, I had sent you a mail regarding the co-op opportunity as well as.
Yeah, and I sent that on to Dave. So maybe there's nothing for you to send.
Yeah,
okay.
Simply it was regarding the project 4 of SMA. I had sent you a mail regarding that I would like to get my project 4 of SMA since I had lost it. And,
oh, that was that was what was sticking. So send me an email about that tonight, so it'll be at the top of my list, and I will do that.
I did add the section in the previous mail itself, but perhaps I forgot to check that portion in the mail. I did.
Well, the problem is, the problem is that during the week, I don't get a chance to exhaustively go through my email, and then by the time the weekend, it's way, way, way down there, and do I go that far when I'm cleaning? So send it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
Good. Yep. Why don't you guys come down and move a little closer so we can talk? Preferably here in the first row. So I want to ask everybody the same question, and I don't want you to feel embarrassed about it. I want to know clearly where you are. And if that's nowhere, I want to know that. Okay.
I'm like 75% done with project 2.
You're 75% done with project 2, and you haven't submitted project 3 yet.
That's correct.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what would make sense for you, what functionality do you have working in Project 2?
Browse, ownership.
Do you have versioning working?
I just completed the check-in for non-version,
Mm-hmm.
the first version of a file. So I'm just about to do versioning. So I think once I do versioning, checkout, shouldn't be too hard.
Yeah.
So I'm not none of the implementation is holding me up. It's just ridiculously poor time management throughout the semester.
Yeah.
So I think I can.
How about what else do you have on your agenda between now and the end of the semester, other course-wise?
Not too. I'm taking databases isn't that heavy at all. Most of what was holding back is the internet security labs every week. I didn't realize how much time I was gonna have to put into those.
Mm-hmm.
But I just have one. I just have a little final project for that, but I think it's due after. I have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it's due after project 4.
Okay. All right. Are you fairly comfortable with the communication channel? Have you looked at that, or has that been?
We did that in SMA, and so.
Yeah, this is somewhat different than SMA. It's the same idea, same mental model, but the implementation is significantly different.
Okay.
You know, partly because we're not using something like WCF, we're building it all from the ground up. But the communication channel, what I would suggest is when you, for the project 3, you go directly to project 4 sample. I just cleaned up a few things I think is a little easier to use than so if you go here, I'm looking on my machine. Let's instead, I tell you what, let's pull up the college server. So I want open in a new tab. Okay. So now I want code. Come on. Code. Project 4 help spring 18. So I have a project 4 sample here. So let's let me do a little comparison here. Here's project 3 help spring 18. I had this CPP COM with file transfer, and I don't know why I just didn't go back. This project 4 sample is basically the same, but it's cleaned up a little bit. One of the things I did in the project 3 help was I used a message attribute whose key was file to indicate that I wanted a file sent, and the file was being sent. And I decided that was a bad idea because you might use file, you know, to indicate I want to know if you have that file or whatever. So I changed it to sending file. Okay, and so a few things like that. So if you go, I would take this project 4 sample. Now, what that has in it is all the stuff I was just showing you. You know, it's got the code analyzer and all that stuff. But all you have to do is pull out this CPP COM with file transfer. You know, you can, or you know, the other strategy is what I just indicated. You could start from this project 4 sample and wrap that might be the shortest path, wrap a tab control around it. Okay, so you know, so I think it would make sense from a grade point of view. I think here's what I would do. I wouldn't spend a lot of time with versioning. Try, you know, spend a little bit of time, see if you can get it to work quickly. And then I would submit project 2. You know, you want to have the testing, you know, the demonstration.
Yeah.
Okay. But you've already been doing some of that, is that true?
As I've been building.
Yeah, okay. As you've been going, good. So, and then I would take the COM channel from here and the GUI from here for project 3. And what I would do is I would wrap this tab control, because project 3 demands a tab display. So I'd wrap the tab control around that, and And for each tab, I think it would be a good idea to just send a message back and forth saying, this is a mock check-in, and the server replies that he received that mock check-in or something. So there's no real check-in, no real check-out capability. It's just you're showing that you can process those messages. And the way it works is there's this. No, for Project 3 you don't. Project 3 you don't. Well, the idea was that in Project 2 you've done all the real stuff, but it's just demonstratable in a programmatic way. And now in Project 3 you're building the channel and the GUI so it now can become an interactive remote thing. And then Project 4 just couples those together. Okay. So if you started from Project 4 sample and wrapped the tab display around it and showed you could send messages back and forth. And you'll see here, I'm using those dispatchers already. I have a client proc and a server proc.
That's 3 and 4 is just a matter of putting the repository core in.
Yeah. So for Project 4, we just add the repository core from Project 2. And again, even if you didn't have versioning done, let's suppose you attempted versioning and you couldn't get it to work fully, in the time you had, and so you left it out. You could still submit on time your Project 4 without versioning, and you'll lose some requirements points, but a whole lot better than losing 15 or 20 points because you're 4 days late.
So would a good scheme for versioning be like, right now I have my repository core holds 2 DB cores, one that has supposed to be like a quick database that just holds like an unversioned file name.
Okay.
And the database with all the version file names.
Okay.
And I was thinking in the quick database have a category that points to the most recent versioned file of that, that matches that one in the full database. Does that make sense for versioning?
Yeah. My model is that the key, the way I would do the repository, the key is a fully qualified including version file spec. So it's.
Yeah, that's what I have in my
full
database.
Okay.
So it's like kind of redundant that I have the.
Yeah, but having another, something that keeps track of where the latest version is, and or maybe even keeps a chain of all the versions, references to different, whatever you want to do, whatever seems to work. For demonstrating you meet the requirements, just keeping the track of the latest version is probably all you need to do. I think I would, in my repository I'm building this summer, I want to be able to navigate back and forth through the versions so I can compare version 6 with version 4 and see what the changes are or something like that, but you don't have any requirement to do that. So that seems like a very reasonable strategy to me. And, you don't want to get hung up and do a lot of wheel spinning, trying to get something. I think there's value to be gained by beating your head against the wall when you have the time to do it, to fix stuff. You learn skills, debugging skills, and and the pain just helps you remember that's the path I don't want to go down again. That. But so I would be quick to say, okay, I'm going to set that aside for now. Go on. And the trick is just to demonstrate. You want to have this integrated thing, and you have these individual parts. So here's a tab, check-in tab, and I've got a message designed for check-in, and I got the procs designed, and then I can move to the next thing. And it's just the same kind of thing. Once you have those tabs set up, then it's just a matter of design the message or messages for that activity, and design the server procs and the client procs, and you're done. So, where are you?
Hi, you ask what percentage I'm working on right now, it's like I'm working on project 4 right now. I've already submitted the first 3.
Okay.
But I just did it poorly. I don't think I find it a good way to learn how to do that. So for the project 1, I got only 87, and for the second one, the second project, I got only 76.
Okay. Yeah.
I suffered a 5 days late fee, so theoretically I may got about 80s, but I just didn't really finish all the requirements that I need to finish.
Okay. Are you happy with what you did, aside from the fact that you didn't finish all the requirements? No.
It just didn't figure out the way that I should figure out.
Okay. Are you going to be here this summer?
No, but I don't know if I have a chance to participate in your summer project, but I'd love to. It's like at the beginning of this course, I didn't realize how it would be helpful to attend the help session during the Friday and also the afternoon today, and also how to use the PR properly. But I realized after during the time I'm working on project 3, I found it is really helpful for me to attend that one. So I think I did a better job in project 3.
Good.
I can almost catch up with the other students' pace.
Okay.
I just want to figure out a better way for me to learn it deeply. Like right now, I can only use your some of your code, like the file system or process on the process code, but I don't really know the mechanism of that, like, or something like how I can write it by myself.
Yeah. Are you using, so you're working on project, I want to come back to that in a minute, but in project 4, are you using your NoSQL database from project 2, or are you using mine, or you haven't used any yet?
I'm using mine.
Okay, good, all right. And yours works well enough so that that's gonna work for you?
Yes, it's gonna work, but it's just not.
Good, okay.
Because for the second project, I didn't realize that I need to add some information related to namespace.
Yeah.
So I skipped that part, and I lose some points because of that.
Yeah.
Right now, I've already added the namespace part to my repository core.
Okay.
So I think I can catch up a little.
Good, okay.
I mean, I'm not really satisfied with myself.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Being critical in a healthy, constructive way. Being critical of what you've done is essential. It's, I've had the experience. I've been writing code for years and years and years and years. And I stumbled across some code I had written quite a few years ago, and it was awful. It was terrible code, really bad. Okay, but I'm always looking at what I've done and asking myself, am I satisfied with this? And if I'm not, I try to understand what is it about this that I'm not satisfied with, and is there something I could try to fix it? And I think that would be I think it would be a really worthwhile exercise for you this summer to take I will post, after the grades are in, I will post the best, 2 or 3 of the best project 1s, project 2s, project 3, project 4s. I thought about doing that. A young lady had asked me to do it, and I thought about doing that, but I decided against it. I think this summer would be a really good idea for you to take your code and compare it to either my code for the parts that I've done, and one of these best project codes, just to see. I'm unsatisfied with what I did here didn't work out the way I wanted it to, you'll see a way that does seem to work out. I think that would be a really good idea. I am going to implement Project 4 myself over the summer, just because I need it. You know, my configuration management at home is terrible. Okay, and so I need a good repository, so I'm going to implement it myself. And so I will eventually post that. Probably won't be until August sometime before I'm totally done with it, because there's a bunch of, you know, but you know, when I post it, I will announce on Piazza that I've posted my solution. And if you sign up for Piazza for the summer projects, you'll get the emails. Because what I do is I force out the emails to everybody. When I'm coming in, I say I'm coming in, I'm going to talk about this, you know. And when I post code, I announce that I've posted the code. So, okay. So basically, it sounds to me like you're on the right path. You don't need to do anything other than what you're doing now to get done for this semester, but there's some stuff you probably want to do to get everything out of this course that you really want to get out of it. Right? Make sense?
Yeah.
How are you doing? Where are you?
I need to start with Project 4, but I have an exam of the other core course in 2 days, so I'm working on that. Actually.
Okay. So you've finished and submitted 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah.
Are you happy with them?
Not at all.
Do they work well enough for you to use them in Project 4?
Some bits, not everything.
Okay. Again, as I had suggested to Gabe, you know, one very reasonable alternative is for your Project 4 to start with my Project 4 sample, to add tabs and add a mock, create a message and add mocks for each one of the tabs, you know, and then just start adding that functionality in. I haven't implemented, I implemented a repository in SMA last year. I assigned it as a project and then I did an implementation myself to show them. But it was done, we had different requirements and different constraints, and the language made differences in the way you would implement stuff. So I don't know that that would be a good, strong, you know, way to, I think, just going where you're going. Young ladies, so I'm here trying to give help for people who really need help. You know, if you're not in that category, you're welcome to leave, but if you feel like you really need some help, then you ought to stick around, because that's what I'm doing. You don't need it? Okay, great, fine. I'm glad you don't need it. So for you guys who came in late, the first part of this help session was devoted to answering questions about Project 4. The second half was helping people who are really struggling to meet and get Project 4 in. So that's what I'm doing now. Okay, so you're welcome to stay. You know, when I'm done with these guys, if you have some questions you want to ask about Project 4, you're welcome to sit and ask them. But for now, for a while, I'm working with these guys. So that seems like a sensible strategy to me. You know, what you'll have to do, if you look at mine, you'll see a grid that has all the stuff in it, and that grid becomes the content of the tab item. And so you got you have an outer grid, and okay, that all makes sense. You're comfortable with that? Okay, good. All right. Well, it sounds like you're in pretty reasonable shape then. Okay. Any other questions or issues or?
May I ask a question related to Project 4?
Sure.
Yeah. So till now, I still have some little puzzles related to namespace. For a single file, is that possible for that single file have different or multiple namespace?
It's possible. So here's the deal. The way C++ works, I have a global namespace, ... that says that I'm not inside any scope with the namespace declarator. And that is treated as a namespace. So for example, if I had, for Tusi's class, I'm working out some tuple code. There's a standard tuple. So how would I, if somebody had declared using standard, how would we distinguish between my tuple and the standard tuple? And it's really easy. All I would have to do is say : tuple. And that says that's my tuple. It's not in the standard namespace. So now I can have, namespace A. I can have inside that namespace AA, and another one, perhaps namespace AB and namespace AC, where doesn't have to be, the names don't have to be really, just different names. And I can also sequence them. So I can have namespace B. So namespaces can be sequenced, they can be nested. I can't overlap the scopes, okay? Also, I can have file boundaries at any namespace boundary. So, for example, I can have a file that declares namespace A, and another file that declares namespace A, and everything, all those things in both files are in namespace A. So the answer to your question is yes, I can have. So some item down here would be, if this is a type, let's suppose that item was a type, then this type would be officially A : AA : item. Okay. And for my repository, I would treat, when I say your key, I think your key should be a namespace : file name : extension : file name .extension .version. Okay. But here, what I mean by this is either A or AA : AA. So if I'm in a nested namespace, I would just have, additional colons here. Okay. And now my separator, you may want to need to separate them. You just look for the last : string has find last of : and that'll let you split them out into parts if you wanted to do that. Okay. So my view is that ought to be the key. The key has to be a unique identifier, and the only way it can be unique is if you use the namespace the way they're intended to be used in C++. And I think it works the same in Java, doesn't it? The Java namespaces work that way? I know C# namespaces do. Yeah. You can sequence them and you can nest them, and so I think all the modern OO languages work that way. Any other questions?
Actually, I also need help.
Okay.
Yeah. So first project I got 84.
Okay.
I got 78. In the midterm I got 86.
Okay.
Okay. So problem was in the project 2 I was not able to complete all the requirements. Okay. So versioning and dependency I was not able to show, even though I did some parts of it. Okay. And so third I did okay. I did fine. I completed all the requirements.
Okay.
But I want to know in project, can I recover and can I get a good grade by focusing a lot? I mean, by doing my project 4 properly. And
yeah. So here's the deal. There's a routine I use, but then I qualify that routine. So let me tell you the routine I use. So when I'm summing up grades, all the projects count equally in the numbers that I generate. The midterm counts 1/3 and the 4 projects count 2/3, but each of the 4 projects count the same. And I add up those numbers and rank them and decide where the grade boundaries are going to be. And then I look at the entries that are just below a grade boundary, and if I see a rising score, I'm very likely to push them over the boundary. I won't take them from the middle, move them up, but I'm very likely, if they're close to the grade boundary, I'm very likely to push them up over the grade boundary. The way I would like to grade it is to grade you based on what I think you're coming away from the course with. And that's not quite what I do because there's too many of you to make that fine-grained distinction. Here's what I would suggest is you send me an email after you've submitted 4 and say, essentially what you've said, and I've worked really hard on this 4th one to try to demonstrate that I know how to do all this stuff. And what I will do is I'll go back and look at yours really carefully to see if I agree and react accordingly. You know, I've got to be fair to the other students. I don't want to do, I can't do something for you that I wouldn't do for everybody else, but you know, I want to make sure that your product gets its day in court, you know, really gets a good, so you send me an email and I'll give you some extra scrutiny, so.
And also, is that project 4 dependent on the requirements of project 1, project 2 and project 3?
If you look at this, the answer is mostly. If you look at this, for example, a remote code repository shall support check-in, check-out versioning and browsing just like we did in Project 2. What that's saying is that down here, when you're demonstrating, you know, provide a repository server that provides functionality to check in, check out, and browse packages specified by NoSQL database queries, that's getting this just like we did in Project 2.
So for this project, I've already done check-in, check-out, versioning and browsing.
Yeah.
But in the project 2, there were some specific more conditions like in we need to handle more of versioning and dependency relation, which I've missed.
Yeah.
So do I have to?
Yeah, you need to demonstrate them.
In Project 4.
In Project 4. Okay, you need to demonstrate that you met the. Maybe not in as much detail. One of your issues was your test data was awful. You know, so.
I did put show DB.
Yeah, and what you really want to do maybe is to make little toy DBs, you know, with a couple of entries, and so when you show them, you're only showing a couple of items or something, you know, whatever. Or, you know, instead of creating a dummy DB, you do a query. Here's what the database shows for these records, and now I'm going to make this change. Now, same query. Here's what the database now shows for these 2 records.
But
like
what I have done right now is for doing check-in, check-out is when I do check-in, when I start my GUI, I do a check-in. So I'm doing not file based, I'm doing package based. So if you check in a package, all the files inside go.
Yep.
They get checked in. So when I do a check-in, I'm saving the DB in an XML file. And when I'm trying to do a checkout, I'm loading the DB from that XML file. And then I'm doing check-in.
I don't understand why you're doing that.
No, because when I'm doing a check-in, once I do a check-in and once I stop the application, the DB is lost, right?
No, if you stop the application, then you got to do it. Yeah. If for your testing you got to stop the application, then you'd have to do that. Yeah. I mean, you don't want it by default every time you do a check-in.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So, send me an email about it, and I will, look at it carefully and, within the constraints that I'm fair to everybody, Your grades surprised me a little bit. I know from your questions that you know an awful lot about what's going on, so. How are you two guys doing? You got questions about Project 4? Or?
A few, but we can wait.
I think we're done with the, are we done, guys, with the basic help? Okay.
Actually, I have another question.
Sure.
Project 4, so it's more regards to the design of it. So in Project 2, when I design my check-in, I send the file to a folder. And in Project 3, when I click the check-in button, I also send the file. So it's like there's some overlap. There's some duplicate functions there. So what I want to design here, I don't know if it's proper, but what I want to design is I make a temp folder for me to storage the file that's sent directly from the client side to the server side. And then I change the file name inside that temp folder of that file. And then I send it
Then you copy it. I think that makes all the sense in the world. I would probably do my own design that way this summer. I haven't thought through all those details yet, but I think that makes a lot of sense. I would, my knee-jerk reaction always is to avoid copying if I don't really need to do it, but if doing a copy makes the design significantly easier, I'd probably opt to do the copy and make the design simpler, just because it's better, easier to maintain.
Yeah, it's easy for me because I don't need to change a lot of things.
That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's a perfectly, valid design decision to make. So, okay. Okay, I think we're ready to handle whatever questions you have about Project 4.
I guess my first is that for the passing files back and forth between the client and the server, is the way you've done it in the sample project sufficient?
Ask this again. Sending.
So to send files.
Yeah. So now.
The way you did it in the sample.
I did Project 4 sample. I cleaned up, so I gave you a demo in Project 3 Help Spring 18, okay? I made a couple of very small changes, but changes I think are saner in Project 4 sample. In Project 3, I used an attribute file to indicate that I was sending a file, but I thought that was dangerous. So I changed that attribute to sending file is what my function looks for, okay? And there was one place where sometimes I could send an empty message that I didn't intend to send, and I fixed that, So I don't think you need to do anything with Project 4. I think sending files that way is fine, using that Project 4 sample communication channel.
Okay. And then for the demonstration, it should be done similar to Project 3, where the GUI executes its own set of tests, and we just show.
Yeah. It's okay if you, for the purpose of demonstrating you meet the requirements, if it's easier to put some of that demonstration in the server, as display on the server, that's okay. Ideally, all your tests come back to the client, because in the real world, nobody's sitting at the server's sitting in a closet someplace, you know, nobody's looking at it, and you need to see all the test results back on the client. So that's preferable, but, you know, you guys got a lot to do in a short amount of time, and you know, displaying some of the requirement on the server is okay.
So I guess still with the displaying the test results, in projects 1 and 2, we always printed it out to the console.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, as long as we have the GUI changing to different tabs and we show that we're selecting different items, having part of the result print back to the client-side console, would that be okay as well?
Yeah, I still think using the console, I think building the ability to see all the test results in the GUI is a mistake, because you're going to spend a lot of time doing stuff that really isn't part of the central functionality. I think seeing test results in a console is the right way to do it. My own opinion is that's the right way to do testing. So I would continue just writing it out to the console.
I ask because in project 3, all the test results basically change the status bar of the console that said the functions might get implemented.
That's okay.
But then
that's okay.
Here, there's going to be a lot more information.
Yeah, so I would write it out on the console. I would have the GUI, you know, support a console just by changing the project type to console, and write it out at the console. But you want to organize it carefully. The design of the test is almost as important as the design of the functionality.
So I guess it would be okay to go through each of the requirements in project 4, use the similar tests that we did for earlier projects,
yeah,
and then just run through
those. That was my intent, that a lot of the testing just gets carried through from project, that you're really building on stuff you've done before. Yeah.
And I don't think we have.
Okay. Young lady, do you have any questions? No? What's your name? I don't know your name. What's your name? Joyce? That's an English name you use instead of me trying to pronounce your Chinese name? Okay. Yeah. So you're doing okay, Joyce?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a confident yeah, or is it a?
No.
We've just got a lot on our plate with courses and more review.
Yeah. Okay. She doing okay, you think?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'll take your report.
I have a doubt.
You have a doubt.
So, in the second point, display package categories based on metadata. Display package category. Yeah, this one. So what are we supposed to do in this?
So all you're going to do is, you pick a package or file, you know, depending on which, but in your case it would be a package. You pick a package, and you do a query, and you display all the
categories of
all the categories of all the files. I think that's something that really should be done in the GUI, but you don't have a requirement to do it in the GUI. I think that's something that people want to know. I would make that part of the navigation, you know, part of the browsing facility.
Okay, so browsing, you get all the categories and then you...
Yeah, I would do that, but, you know, it's your design. You can have a separate metadata tab, you know, if you wanted to, and show the categories there and description and all that. That would be okay. Whatever seems to make the most sense to you. You know, a lot of times I'll have this quite fixed notion of how a project should be, and then somebody does a beautiful job, and I say, what a great idea, and I steal their idea, okay, and use it myself later on. Okay, so. All right.
And for third one, display collection of files based on queries. So that I've done in the browse tab. So what I've done is I've given one text box and one combo box. And the combo box, you have to select that what are you trying to search on. So suppose if he selects
Okay, yeah.
and then he
yeah,
puts a category,
sure,
and then based
sure.
on that, I do a
Fine,
query.
fine. There's an art, you know, what you're doing is high quality brute force. You're just providing all the combinations and and it's, nothing wrong with that. What you'd like is to try to come up with some concept of, is there some more general way that I can, get to see anything I want is with some really simple, and I don't know that but I tend to sit back when I'm poised to do something like what you're talking about, providing controls for each of the combinations and stuff. I am very likely to sit back and say, is there some more general way, that I can do this and present? And I don't know that there is now. I haven't done that thought process, but nothing wrong with what you're suggesting.
And so coding wise, I'm okay. I mean, I'll be able to complete all the functionalities. But can I sit with the TA and work on the testing part, demonstrating the requirements, what to show?
You can. You'll find them a little harder to get a hold of now because they're really busy grading. They're grading Project 3, so I can get them back on the Thursday of next week, and then they're going to immediately turn to grading Project 4s, as soon as they start rolling out. So you definitely can. I think the best strategy might be to, and do me a favor, send me an email about it, because I want to, next Friday, they'll be in between grading. They should have had essentially all their grading done for Project 3, and Project 4s won't come till the next Tuesday. So next Friday might be a good time to sit down with them, and but you want to be ready for it. You want to have stuff to show them. Send me an email about it, and I will send them an email to see if we can't set aside a time. Maybe I'm not going to turn back Project 3s until the last day of classes, that Tuesday, because I'm not going to get them. No, I take that back. I'm going to turn them back Friday morning, so that we can have a grievance session Friday night. But I'm going to get them from them Thursday. So, send me an email about it, and I'll ask them to, maybe start the Friday evening's help session a little earlier or something like that. Or maybe you could make an appointment with one of them for Friday afternoon or something like that to sit down and walk through it.
I have one last doubt actually. So since I'm doing check-in package based, and what I've assumed is in the package itself, or the directory itself, I will have one metadata file, and that metadata will have an element for each file.
So you're not storing that in the database?
No. When I'm doing a check-in, so
Okay.
you have the directory, you have
Okay.
the files, and in that you have a metadata. And once it goes to the NoSQL DB, then it stores everything. It reads the metadata file
Oh, okay,
and stores the
okay.
element.
That's your scheme for doing it. Okay.
Yeah. So for the second project, it was working fine. But for the project 2, for the project 4, in the GUI, I have to make the metadata. Okay. So what I have done is, when you're trying to first check in, you click on a directory. It opens a new window with all the files listed. You click on a file. It again opens one more window, and in that you create the metadata only for that file. And then
What do you mean you create the metadata? You're entering information into text boxes?
Yes.
Okay.
And then it creates a small an XML file only for that file. Okay. So for example, there is Ankur.h. So I create a Ankur.xml for that file.
Okay.
So, and once I've done that for all the files, I go back. Now I want to create a final metadata file. So what I do is I take all the individual metadata files, I combine them together, I create one.
You could do that, but I wouldn't do that. I would just send my metadata as attributes in a message. It's really easy to do.
No, I did this because since in project 2 I was already sending the metadata to XML. I thought I'll use the same sending.
Yeah, I mean, I see why you're doing it. You know, once you've done it and got it into work, you want to use the same thing. But I would have done it as attributes in a message. I never would have generated the XML file. Just avoided that.
Because I was talking to UL also, so he also did the same thing. Why are you not sending in the messages? Not XML.
Yeah.
I told him I'm just reusing what I did in project 2.
Yeah.